The color really does have an impact on your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like with these billions of dollars, the technology companies actually hire psychologists to intentionally do this stuff. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of Acquired, the podcast about technology acquisitions and IPOs. I'm Ben Gilbert.
I'm David Rosenthal.
And we are your hosts. It's finally time to cover a no-brainer story here on Acquired, Google's 2014 acquisition of Nest. David, are you pumped?
I am so pumped.
There's no shortage of research for this one. There's no shortage of requests for this one. And actually, that's pretty timely with the announcement coming out last week that Google is rolling Nest back into, or I guess for the first time, into its main hardware business instead of running as an independent subsidiary.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, like, which Nest acquisition or divestiture is this officially going to be about? Because there was the original acquisition, the rolling out into a standalone unit of Alphabet, and now the reacquisition back into Google.
Yeah, well, and not to mention a $500 million pickup of Dropcam along the way.
Along the way. We just might cover that.
It's true. It's true. So to make sure we're on the same page for the full episode, this is the original acquisition of Nest, where Google actually wired cash to the bank accounts of people who own shares in Nest.
That's so prosaic, Ben.
A couple of announcements for listeners before we dive in. David and I have been playing around with a lot of new podcast apps recently, and one of them that's pretty cool is Breaker. So if you're using the Breaker app and listening to us right now, or if you want to try it out, please comment on this episode. We're experimenting with how the rise of social podcast apps sort of affects discoverability, and would love your comment on this episode to see how it compares to the effect of people leaving reviews on iTunes accounts. So maybe if we mobilize the Acquired base, we can help discoverability of the show. If you are new to the show, you can check out our Slack at acquired.fm, over 1,100 strong.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to talk about a new partner of ours here on Acquired, Legora, the agentic operating system that is redefining how the world's best legal teams work.
Yep, it's sort of obvious that AI is going to completely change the legal industry. I bet most of you listening have dropped a contract into some sort of AI chatbot out there. Legora took that insight and asked the question, what if you really built something with that power from the ground up for the legal industry?
So the founders did exactly what great founders do, operate with obsessive customer focus. They embedded inside a massive law firm for months. They sat with the lawyers just watching how the work really gets done.
And that's how you get features that customers love, like Tabular Review, where you drop in a folder of hundreds of contracts and it pulls every key term into a grid a lawyer can actually work with. Legora's bet here is interesting. Since it lets each lawyer handle more complexity, any given person can increase the quality of their work and do higher value work. And this means that the pie can grow even as each individual task takes less time.
And they recently launched Legora Agent, offering greater intelligence and performance. The agent lets lawyers set an objective. Then it can handle the planning and the execution and delivery of the final product. Legal teams get to maintain full control and transparency since they're still involved where judgment is required.
And Legora works where you already work. You can use it within Microsoft Word while redlining or drafting. The early Legora numbers essentially speak for themselves. When they have a head-to-head pilot with their top competitor, they win 70% of the time. Legora now has over 100,000 lawyers on the platform from 1,200 legal teams in 50 countries. And crazily, they went from 1 million to 100 million in ARR in about 18 months.
Truly insane numbers. And that is the real test. Plenty of things demo well, but the question is whether a busy associate actually reaches for it during crunch time, or whether a partner trusts it before going into a conversation with a major client. If your legal team wants to check it out, whether you're a law firm or you're in-house at a company, you can learn more at legora.com/acquired and just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So David, I think we've got one piece of follow-up before diving in.
Yeah. So we wanted to do a follow up on the Apple Beats episode, which actually kind of hard to believe was the last episode, just you and me, that we did together.
That's right.
We've had so many guests and specials since then, which have been great. But in the interim, listener Devin wrote into us about something that we didn't talk about in the Apple Beats story. And that's that Dr. Dre has a history of assault back in his earlier days with NWA. And in particular, assault and violence towards women, which is obviously a pretty important thing, and we should have mentioned it as part of the episode. So now in this case, it's somewhat of a complicated situation, and we aren't really equipped on Acquired to prosecute the specifics of this or any other case, really. But the documentary that we mentioned, The Defiant Ones, addresses it pretty well and pretty fully. So definitely you should go watch the movie for lots of reasons, but this is an important one. But that said, we do think it's important for us to acknowledge it, and we want to make sure we put it out there on this show. So thank you, Devin, for calling it out.
Yeah, but I think, David, to just underscore your point, this just hit us like a ton of bricks when we got this email, because we didn't mention it once on the episode, and it shouldn't go overlooked. And, we do a lot of founder glorifying on the show, and I think it's really important to, look at the whole person.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, just like you said, Ben, it's easy to treat, founders and Silicon Valley folks as heroes. We often do on this show, but, they're people like any other people, and some have good sides, some have bad sides. And it's just important to remember that. So we'll try and keep that in mind with everyone going forward. Thanks again, Devin, for pointing it out. And with that, let's move on to Google and Nest. Okay. So you definitely can't talk about Nest without talking about the well-known and at times controversial, though not as controversial as Dr. Dre, co-founder, whose name is basically synonymous with the company. Of course, I'm talking about Matt Rogers.
Classic. Matt Rogers, just always all over the news.
Always all over the news. No, Matt Rogers is the co-founder and I believe chief product officer of Nest, and we're going to talk a lot about Matt. But no, the person I'm referring to is the quote unquote father of the iPod, Tony Fadell. Which I presume most folks listening to the show have heard something about in the past. But who is Tony? Well, so Tony grew up in the 70s and early 80s, primarily in Detroit, although his father was a salesperson for Levi Strauss, the jeans company, based here in San Francisco. So they moved around quite a lot. But Tony, turns out, was really influenced by his maternal grandfather, so his mom's dad, who also lived in the Detroit area. And he was like this sounds like awesome kind of Depression era, like, self-reliant, like tinkerer sort of. He was not an engineer. He was a school teacher and a school superintendent, but sort of proto engineer. And he really encouraged Tony when he was growing up to like fix stuff around the house and do everything yourself and take things apart and understand how they worked. And so this had like a big impact on Tony. And then when he was around the age of 12, he discovered computers and took that same approach to computers. So he got an Apple II, he took it apart, he put it back together, was totally obsessed with it.
David, can I just pause for a minute? Like, I have some of the stuff that you find, like, it's like you grew up with Tony somehow. It's like, oh yeah, like he was down the street from me, and it's just impressive.
Well, we do a lot of research on this show, and a lot of this comes from Tony was part of... I forget exactly what this organization is called. It's like the Achievement Organization or Achievers or something like that. And he received a award from them and did a big oral history on kind of his background. So we'll see if we can link to that in the show notes. But there's a lot of good stuff out there about all of this history. So he buys the Apple II. He's hooked on computers. He ends up going to college at the University of Michigan. This is in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. And he studies computer engineering, which is a combination of computer science and electrical engineering. So he's getting both hardware and software in school. And then he also gets an education in entrepreneurship at school. He starts actually not one, but three different companies while he's at the University of Michigan. The largest, most successful of which was an education software company that he started with one of his professors. That was called, I think, Constructive Instruments. So he's got the hardware, he's got the software, he's got the entrepreneurship. He's a total Mac nerd and nut. And apparently he's a subscriber to Macworld, and he reads the magazine religiously, and he hears about this right as he's a senior getting ready to graduate. He hears about this stealth startup in Silicon Valley that was a spin out from Apple, started by a bunch of legends from the initial Mac team, called General Magic. And Tony decides, I need to go get a job at General Magic and move out to Silicon Valley.
So, David, before the show, we were texting, and you alerted me to the existence of General Magic. And I have a shame bag over my head of calling myself an Apple nerd and having having cared about the company for a long time. I did not know about this company, and it's insane. Tell us about some of the history of General Magic.
Totally insane. So this company was started in the early 90s in the Valley. And it was all the legends from the initial the original Mac team at Apple. So it was Bill Atkinson, Andy Hertzfeld, Mark Porat, and Joanna Hoffman. Many, if not all of those, I think are kind of central characters in the Steve Jobs movie, which is another good movie you should all go see if you haven't. And they were all super well known in the Mac community. And they left Apple to start this company, and it was totally secret what they were doing. So Tony and nobody else had any idea what they were actually doing. It was just that it was this dream team out in the Valley. So he graduates, he goes out there, and he basically talks himself into a job with General Magic. I think he was the 30th employee or something like that. And it turns out that what they're doing is they have a vision to essentially build the iPhone, but it's the early 90s, so it's way too early for the iPhone. And the company actually turns out it would consume a whole bunch of capital. It would go public. It would fail. It would pivot a bunch of times. One of the things that comes out of it ends up being OnStar. The if you've ever driven a Chevy or a GM vehicle, the connected roadside assistant thing. But the vision was to build an internet connected PDA, personal digital assistant, that people could keep with them, all throughout their day and their lives. It would be connected to the internet. It could do email, could do phone calls.
And amazingly, some of the other people who worked at General Magic along the way, Andy Rubin, who started Danger and Android, Pierre Omidyar, Omidyar, I never know.
Omidyar, I think. Yeah.
Omidyar, founder of eBay. Kevin Lynch, who was the CTO of Adobe and now runs Apple Watch at Apple. There's this just ridiculous mafia of people that worked at General Magic, and each sort of, even though the company failed, took little pieces of its vision and made them reality at different pieces of the ecosystem. Yeah.
It's awesome. We didn't know when we started digging into the history for this that this was going to be as much an Apple episode as a Google episode. But
with Tony Fadell, you just can't you can't stay away.
You can't stay away from it. So Tony works there for 3 years in his first job. And it kind of becomes clear that the market is not ready. The technologies are not ready for, essentially the iPhone yet. So he leaves, but he's not done. He goes to Philips, the big Dutch electronics manufacturer. He becomes the youngest senior management member there. And he essentially tries to do what General Magic was trying to do, build a connected PDA inside Philips. And he spends 4 years there trying to make it happen. Also fails. And he kind of develops a reputation as it's unclear how much of this is just who Tony is and how much is he was intentionally trying to cultivate this persona. But he's the brash, young, Silicon Valley hotshot in this big stodgy company. He gets a reputation for yelling and screaming during meetings and all sorts of stuff. At one point, I guess Fast Company does a profile on him, and they ask him, what would you be doing if you weren't in tech? And he says, I'd probably be in jail, which is probably not true, but There we are. That was the reputation he was cultivating. So it's not working. This whole connected PDA thing isn't working within Philips either. A couple years later, 1999, Napster's around. The internet's really taking off. Music and MP3s are a thing. And Tony's like, MP3s, like, this is the future. I want to get involved in this. I need to go get in this industry. And so he takes...
Isn't there some crazy story about like Toshiba made these tiny hard drives, but they didn't exactly know what to do with them? And somehow Tony's like, oh, I know what to do with them.
Well, that was not Tony, but that was John Rubinstein at Apple. We'll get to that in a sec. But so Tony's like, I want to get into music. You know, he could go to Apple. He could do all these things. He's like, I'm going to go to Real Networks, which is the company in Seattle.
Yeah, baby.
Of course,
right in our backyard.
Real Networks, right in our backyard.
Which, and, speaking of mafias, the like mafia of people that came out of Real is pretty insane too. Like particularly in the Seattle tech ecosystem, you look around at particularly at all the major like successful consumer companies, and the Real Networks mafia is probably sort of the most dominant source of talent in the region over the last 20 years.
Yeah, that and the Aquanav mafia, of course, too.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Tony takes a job at Real. He lasts all of 6 weeks. Remember, he's like the controversial executive here. He stays at Real for 6 weeks. Something happens. And he decides, you know what, I'm still going to pursue this MP3 thing, but I'm going to do my own startup and do it on my own. So he leaves. He starts a company called Fuse Systems. And his approach to MP3s is he wants to build hardware to play MP3s, but he's not yet thinking about, you know, portable iPod style hardware. He wants to make like audiophile quality, rack mounted, like stereo hardware, like something you would keep next to your, you know, receiver in your home hi-fi system.
Next to your HomePod.
Yeah, next to your HomePod. Exactly. He's habitually like 20 years ahead of the world. So he does that. He starts the company, like I said, in 1999. Things go along. He raises some money, but then the .com crash happens, and it's 2000, 2001. The company, even with Tony's reputation, is not able to raise money. He's running out of cash. He's trying to figure out what to do. And so one weekend, apparently, he's skiing. He also loves skiing. This is going to become a recurring theme here. He's skiing in Tahoe, and he gets a call on his cell phone, and he picks it up, and it is John Rubinstein from Apple, who is the SVP of hardware at Apple. And John was a veteran of Next. So he had joined Next when Steve Jobs was at Next, then came with Steve back into Apple, and was running hardware at the time. And so John and Steve have been thinking about the music space for a long time. This is now the spring of 2001. They just launched the iTunes software. The store wasn't out yet. And they're looking for potential to build a hardware player to go along with it. And they couldn't quite find the technology to do it. And then apparently the story is that John and Steve are separately on business trips to Japan, and John's meeting with Toshiba, and they show him this 1.8 inch hard drive that they have. And they're like, we don't really know what to do with it, like you were saying. And John's like, I know what to do with this. So apparently Steve was also in Japan at the time. John calls him up and he's like, we got to get together. They get together for dinner at a hotel, and he's like, I've got it. We can do it. 1,000 songs in your pocket. Toshiba has the hard drives. We can make it happen. And so Steve's like, all right, go ahead. And John finds out about what Tony had been working on, calls him up, and he's like, Tony, you're the guy. You got to come in here. We need your help. Can you come do a consulting project for us? And Tony's like, okay, I need some money because I'm running out of cash at my startup. He comes in, starts the consulting project, and he quickly figures out that this is the most important thing at Apple going on here. So he spends 6 weeks. He puts together a whole plan for what components Apple needs to build this hardware, all the software coming together. And and he actually builds a styrofoam model of what the iPod could look like.
That's amazing. That's super similar to the story of the original Palm. The founder of Palm ended up carving it out of a block of wood, and then for like weeks bringing around this block of wood to meetings and pulling it out of his pocket to like pretend to take notes on the block of wood to see like, does the form factor work for me?
Yeah, it's product design. It starts with tinkering.
That's right.
So the end of the project, he presents to the whole senior leadership team at Apple, and they're like, "Okay, great. We want to hire you to come do this." And Tony's like, "Well, but I've got this startup and I've got all these employees." And
let's be clear, like how is he doing a consulting gig while running a startup? Like for anybody running a startup, like imagine going and taking on a incredibly important product, even for like a month and a half at a company like Apple. How does that work?
Yeah. This is where the research gets a little unclear. This is the problem with, when you're listening to Tony tell the story only from his side. Right. I couldn't find anything out there of how the employees of Fuse felt about this.
Feels like there may be like a very strong COO presence or something at Fuse.
Yeah. Well, who knows? So anyway, Apple and Steve and John Rubinstein are like, great, we want to hire you. We don't want to acquire Fuse. We want to hire you. And after a bunch of thinking about it, Tony says, okay, fine. So he shuts down Fuse and he goes to work in the spring of 2001 for Apple. And basically, like, this becomes the focus of like the entire company for the next couple months because they want to get the product shipped for the holiday season. And they do. It's pretty amazing. From like, it's like 10 months from when Rubinstein sees the 1.8 inch hard drives at Toshiba in Japan till they ship the iPod in October of 2001.
That's mind blowing. Like think about the number of Kickstarters that like take 3 years and then don't ship a product. I mean, to be able to do that in 10 months.
Totally mind-blowing. And I promise this is all leading to Nest eventually. So Tony stays on at Apple after they ship the first iPod. He ends up working on the next 18 versions of the iPod. And in 2006, John Rubinstein retires and Tony replaces him as SVP of the iPod division. So he's reporting directly to Steve, one of the most senior managers within Apple. And so just before that happened, I promised that Matt Rogers would come into the story eventually.
The famous
Matt Rogers. The iPod team hires an intern from Carnegie Mellon who shows up in, I think this was 2005, and it's Matt. And he shows up and they sit him. I don't know if he was the first intern or one of the only interns on the iPod team. They sit him next to the printer cube and like they basically make him do like all of the grunt work for the iPod team. And Matt like loves it. He does a great entrepreneurial thought leaders talk at Stanford a couple years after he started Nest, and talks about this and how like he was just so happy to be working at Apple, so happy to be working on the iPod team. He was like fetching printer paper. He was traveling around the world handling logistics for like installing firmware on the iPod Shuffle and all this stuff. So he makes a big impression on Tony. And apparently at the end of the summer, Tony gives him a cash bonus for his work during the summer, which like the Apple and the iPod team had never done before. Matt was the only person to have this happen. So he graduates. He comes back to work for Apple and for the iPod team, right as Tony is getting promoted to being the head of the whole thing. And this was in 2006. And at the same time, this is when the iPhone is starting to get worked on within Apple. And this is so cool, reaching back to other of our episodes here. And it was fun to read about this. As is now kind of widely known, there were two competing projects to become the iPhone.
Purple 1 and Purple 2.
Yeah. And so I think the iPod, I think Tony's was Purple 1. And it was the plan was they were going to take the iPod software and hardware and push that towards a phone. And so Tony, Matt, everybody's working on that. And then competing within the company, Steve also had Scott Forstall take OS 10 and try and shrink that down to fit it onto something the size of a phone. And famously, the direction that Tony goes is using the iconic click wheel for the iPod, and that's the primary interface to the phone. And Scott goes with the touch interface. And this is all now talked about when the 10th anniversary of the iPhone happened last year. Both Tony and Scott, did a bunch of interviews and talked about this. And apparently it was like pretty bitter rivalry within the company between these two teams.
I bet. It's interesting too, thinking about now when we reflect on like Apple's revolutionary interface, it's multi-touch, like that they invented this incredible capacitive touch thing that is like the dominant way that people interact with technology now. But they had already done that once before. Like Tony and team with the iPod, the click wheel was completely revolutionary and
completely revolutionary.
Compared to like the Rio players and the Walkman that came before it, like it was a completely different experience. And companies rarely have like that dominant of an innovation twice. And you could argue multiple more times after that too.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And it all comes from different people within Apple.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to tell you about a longtime friend of the show, Vanta. AI has scrambled the whole security picture. It used to be that you proved that you were secure once a year, an audit or a static PDF, then everyone would nod and you're done. But in an AI-first world, that doesn't hold up anymore.
Yep, your risk surface changes every week now. A vendor turns on an AI feature or someone writes in a new model without telling IT, and your posture is different than it was last week, let alone at your last audit. Vanta's own research found that around 70% of companies have this quote-unquote shadow AI running with no security review at all.
Right. And that's where Vanta comes in. They're the leading agentic trust platform, meaning they've built the thing that closes the gap. And the way that they close that gap is Vanta Agent. Think of it as a GRC engineer, that's governance, risk, and compliance, except that it's software and it doesn't sleep. It finds the issues, drafts the fixes, and cuts the time that you'd spend on vendor assessments in half.
In half! Which is exactly why more than 16,000 companies today run on Vanta. Companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Snowflake all stay audit ready and catch the risks that crop up between audits across every vendor, every AI tool, the whole environment.
And that's the real value. Trust has to be continuous now, which is why Vanta automates your security, your compliance, and the work to earn and prove trust. We're huge fans of Vanta over here, and literally hundreds of acquired listeners have become Vanta customers at their companies over the years. So you can get $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/acquired. That's VANTA.com/acquired for $1,000 off. And just tell them that Ben and David sent you.
So obviously Scott Forrestal's team with the multi-touch wins the battle of the codename Purple iPhone, the future of the iPhone. And this was just shocking when I saw it. We're going to link to this in the show notes. So if you watch the demo in January 2007, when Steve Jobs announces the iPhone, like probably the most famous Steve Jobs moment in history, when he's walking through how the phone app works and he's going through the favorites, he's showing how you can add favorites, the favorites tab, and it's all visual and this is all new. And then he talks about it's easy to remove somebody. And he removes a contact from his favorites. The contact he removes is Tony Fadell.
No way.
Cold-blooded. It's brutal. And of course, nobody knew, but apparently, there are a bunch of interviews now afterwards. Now this has all come out that all the engineers, at least on the iPod team, knew that they knew exactly what that meant. And so as foreshadowed by Steve in the demo, within the next couple months, Tony is gone from Apple. And so it's now late 2007, 2008. He's left Apple. His wife, who he had met at Apple, they both leave, and they're like, all right, we're done with this. Like, this is too much. We're going to spend some time with our kids. They have young kids. They do two things. One, as you mentioned, Tony had always loved skiing. He loves Tahoe. They decide they're going to build their dream vacation home in Tahoe. and they're going to travel all around the world. Make up for all this time they'd spent, at Apple working super hard for the last 10 years. So they start building the Tahoe house, and then they're traveling around the world. They start spending a lot of time in Paris. They end up buying an apartment in Paris. But when they're working through the Tahoe house, Tony's like, he's kind of like going back to his grandfather, and like as he talks about it, and like, tinkering, wanting to be involved with everything. He can't help himself. And he's like, all these products, everything that's going into the house, it's all like total BS. Like these things suck. Like I can do so much better. So he's thinking about that. He also wants the house to be super green and energy efficient. He's finding it really hard to do that. And he ends up one day, when he's back in the valley and he's from Paris and he's working on the Tahoe stuff, he gets lunch with his old intern, with Matt. And it turns out that Matt had also bought a house recently in the valley, and the house was like from the 70s and had all this old, 70s style equipment in there. And Matt's also trying to kind of retrofit it, having a super hard time. And Matt's like, he's having lunch with his like boss's boss, who he was the intern. He's like, we should start a company together. We got to do this.
That is the strangest feeling after you leave a company and someone was like a mythical person from on high that you only saw speak to 1,000 people, and you may have had one or two interactions with, but like then to just like all the pretense is gone because you've both left the company, and this happened to me just a couple times, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's weird to collapse all those levels of management and then just have like a human to human relationship with someone. Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about a guy who was literally once in Steve Jobs' favorites on his iPhone. So Tony's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of enjoying this, Paris thing, but right. Maybe like you work on it and you see kind of what's there. So Matt throws himself into this. He's still at Apple. He starts doing a ton of market research. He gets Tony excited. They're doing it too. They're talking to installers. They're going and they're looking at homes. They end up talking to somebody in the EPA who's done a lot of thinking about how thermostats can influence, and energy consumption.
Matt was still at Apple during this?
And Matt was still at Apple during this. And so he's pumped. He's trying to get Tony excited. And then supposedly, as the story goes, told by Tony, one day he's back in Paris. He's just dropped his kids off at school, I think. They're at a French preschool, and he's walking along a bridge by the Louvre, and he looks at the Louvre and he thinks about all the like great stuff and great creations in there. And he's like, you know what? I'm not done. I want to get back in it. And so he calls Matt up from a bridge over the Seine.
What a setting right there.
What a setting. And he's like, I'm in. We're doing it. So Matt leaves Apple at this point, rents, of course, a garage in Palo Alto, and starts tinkering on stuff. And apparently in those early days, like nobody even knew that Tony was involved. They wanted to be super, super stealth. So it was just Matt. Tony moves back to the Valley in June. He and his wife move back. He becomes CEO, and they decide that they're going to name the company Nest because the goal is, I don't think they've even landed fully on doing thermostats yet, but they want to reinvent the home. And they're talking about they're like, what can we call the company? They're talking about the old MTV show Cribs, and they start riffing on that, and that's how they come up with Nest, apparently.
They should have just called it Crib. Yeah,
I know, they should have called it Cribs. Maybe it would be, they would be doing better in Google, but
whoa, David, let's we're not at that part yet.
We're not at that part yet. So they recruit a killer team from Apple, folks they'd worked with. They recruit some folks from General Magic, and then they make one really key hire. They're able to land Matt's thesis advisor from CMU. It's a woman named Yoki Matsuoka, who is a pretty incredible person. So in the couple of years since Matt was at CMU, she'd left academia to co-found Google X with Sebastian Thrun. She was a robotics expert at CMU, and then actually at the University of Washington in Seattle. And so she co-founds Google X with Sebastian Thrun. She also gets awarded the MacArthur Genius Grant for her work. and she'd been at Google X about a year, and Tony and Matt are able to recruit her away, and she joins as VP of Technology in the super early days at Nest. And then Sebastian, he's like, of course, interested by this, so he ends up getting involved. He becomes an advisor to the company as well. So there's a lot of
while he's still running
here.
Google X.
While he's still running Google X, yeah. So September of that year, 2010, they raise a $9.5 million Series A from Kleiner Perkins and Shasta. And then they get to work. At this point, they've decided that the thermostat is their entry point into the home. They want to build a whole generation of both products, hardware products, to make the home more intelligent, but also the software layer and the operating system that's gonna bring it all together. So they raise their Series A, and then apparently in early 2011, so they don't ship the product until they take a whole year. October 2011, they ship the product. In early 2011, though, Sergey Brin, the Google co-founder, sees an early demo and an early version of the thermostat. And apparently he's blown away. He thinks that like immediately this is going to be the next, after smartphones, the home is going to be the next operating system. He wants to acquire the company right away. And the company said no. So that was the first time Google tried to buy the company.
Wow. Perhaps my grade at the end of this episode would have been higher if it was bought at that stage.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to save it for what would have happened otherwise.
That's right. And so it's worth like touching on, now this doesn't seem as revolutionary. Like, oh, of course, the smart home, it's in many news stories. There's many great companies. It's a lot of funding around this now. Clear ecosystem plays with Google Home and Alexa and all that. This is ridiculous at the time. Like, I remember seeing their landing page, and it's like, it's Apple-esque and it's beautiful and it's got the thermostat on it, and it's, announcing like at some point we'll ship this thing and you can get information and updates here. And just the media cycle around this was just ripping it apart. Like, this is the peak of Silicon Valley, buying their own BS. Are you kidding me? Like, this is not innovation. Like, really, thermostats is the next frontier. And it was just kind of prescient.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like there's a lesson here, because the same thing happened with Rover, which started right around the same time, almost exactly at the same time.
Yep.
And there were all these TechCrunch articles like Airbnb for dogs. Like, this is a sign of the apocalypse. Silicon Valley is over.
Well, and people thought Aaron, the CEO of Rover, Aaron Easterly, people thought he was nuts for going and doing this.
Total nuts. Yeah. I mean, Aaron had a super successful career at, actually, somewhat similar to Tony, although I think Aaron's personality and Tony's personality are polar opposites probably. But Aaron was the youngest GM at Microsoft ever. He came from Aquaniv when Microsoft acquired that. And that he would go work on, Airbnb for dogs. It's crazy. And yet both of these companies, turn out to be quite important. So
Fidel from reinventing consumer electronics to becoming a thermostat maker.
Yeah. Well, if somebody makes fun of your startup, you should probably take that as a compliment. If people care enough to make,
or at least
fun of your startup.
It's still likely to fail. But if people aren't making fun of it, for sure it's not going to be huge.
Yeah. So the next year, October 2011, as I mentioned, they launched the product Nest Learning Thermostat. There's a ton of buzz, ton of hype. They raise a $55 million Series B, which, remember, this is back October 2011. Like, we're not yet in the steroid era of, like super rounds for startups. This is one of the early, like a $55 million Series B is a lot for a company that just launched a product. But it's all on the back of this hype and the quality of the team.
And the fact that they're making, expensive hardware. That's a,
yep.
Startups are making, it just feels like it's a super capital intensive business to do that R&D and production.
Yep. It definitely is. And so the lead of their Series B is, you guessed it, Google Ventures, one of the first big investments out of Google Ventures, which at that point was a relatively new operation within Google.
And they would actually, they would end up owning, at the time of acquisition, foreshadowing a little bit, 12% of the company before even buying it.
Yep. So that was at the end of 2011. 2012, they launched the second generation of the thermostat, which is compatible with a bunch more homes and wiring systems. It gets up to, I believe with that version up to like 85-90% of home wiring systems are compatible with the Nest, the second version of the Nest. Then January 2013, they raised their Series C. They raised $80 million at a $800 million pre-money valuation. And it gets announced that they're shipping on the order of 50,000 thermostats per month, which at a price of $250 per thermostat puts them well over $100 million annual revenue run rate. Mm-hmm. Now, as you pointed out, Ben, this is hardware revenue with a bunch of costs and expenses associated with it.
This isn't Facebook here.
This is not Facebook, but still, like, that's pretty impressive. About 15 months after launching the product, and what is that, like, less than 3 years after starting the company, or just about 3 years from starting the company. No, less than 3 years. At $100 million revenue run rate,
and I believe not profitable. I think they went all the way through the acquisition and years after, maybe even today. It's not totally clear, but not profitable revenue.
Yeah, not totally clear, but it seems unlikely, especially given how much money they were raising. Presumably, they were doing that for a reason. So then later in 2013, they launched the second product, which was hotly anticipated. They'd always talked about, the vision of being a fully connected home. And it's funny, like, the same thing happens. It's a smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector. And everybody's like, smoke detector? Come on. This is Nest's next product. And we'll come back to the smoke detector later. But that was October 2013. In January 2014, so a couple months later, it gets reported that Nest is now going to be raising a monster round from DST, from Yuri Milner's investment firm that invested in Facebook and many others. They're going to be raising over $200 million at a $3 billion valuation. But instead, on January 13th, it gets announced that Google is finally acquiring the company for $3.2 billion in cash. But Ben, as you pointed out, they already owned 12% of the company.
Yeah, and at this point, still only 280 employees. I mean, to be purchased for that price, making hardware with supply chain and full operations, logistics, retail on their website, channel to retail partners, full R&D team, only 280 employees. It's impressive. I mean, it's $11 million per employee.
It is. And, remember too, like, you mentioned channel, like, that means, Best Buy, that means Lowe's, that means Home Depot.
Right.
That means not just building the relationships with those retailers, but, getting product in shelves, keeping them stocked, all this stuff. It's not easy doing this stuff.
Totally.
So it's announced, and the terms of the deal are pretty interesting. So Nest is to remain wholly independent. So Google is still Google at this point. There's no Alphabet yet. But they announced, they're very clear, this is going to be like YouTube. Tony's going to remain CEO. The management team, Matt and Yoko and everybody else are going to stay independent. Going to have their own offices,
which is very much a Tony demand. Like, we're not getting bought by Google to be integrated and me to have a boss. Like, I get my own P&L, I get my own budget. We have our own office.
And remember, of course, Tony is the veteran of first General Magic and then Philips and then Apple, where he's seen all these corporate politics play out. And, he's had a lot of success, but he's also ultimately lost the game in every case. Mm-hmm. And so supposedly there was a term in the deal. It's not public, no way to know, but it's been reported that there was a term in the actual documents that Nest was given 5 years runway, completely independent of any financial goals. So essentially, as much financial resources as they wanted, with the goal of building like the OS layer hardware and software for the connected home. And no accountability for any sort of profitability or revenue growth, supposedly in the deal.
And then is it later that they wanted them to hit $300 million a year of revenue? There was some target set there at some point.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that was January 2014. That was basically the high water point for Nest, or at least for Nest and Google's relationship.
And here's an interesting data point on that too. So from Google's 10Q that they filed with the SEC a few months after this happened, they talk about how they came to value the deal. And so they say the fair market value of our previously held equity interest was $152 million. So that's that 12%. $51 million was cash that they acquired. So from the last fundraising round or however they were generating cash at Nest. $430 million was attributed to intangible assets, $157 million to net liabilities assumed, and $2.35 billion attributed to goodwill that is primarily for the synergies expected to arise after the acquisition. So, this is not a multiple of current cash flows or anything like that. That this is we believe there are serious synergies with Google, and that's why we're doing this.
Yeah. And interesting. What did you say? $51 million in cash at the company that they acquired? Yeah. Okay. So, and they had raised at that point about $150 million. So that means they'd burned roughly $100 million on the product. Now we don't know what their cash flow was like at the moment in time they were acquired, but I think it's safe to assume they were not profitable and burning a lot of cash.
Right.
Even with the relatively small amount of employees, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was January 2014. Now the bad news starts. April 2014, they have to halt sales of the second product of Nest Protect, of the smoke alarm and carbon monoxide system, because apparently there was a way for the alarm to accidentally be disabled through
You had one job to do.
And so it's a pretty bad thing if your smoke alarm doesn't go off. So they have to recall all the units that are on the shelves at all their retail partners. Fortunately for units that are already installed, they're able to do an over-the-air software update. But not a good way to start under new ownership of Google. Then the next thing that happens to start there with not protecting your customers' homes. In June 2014, Nest acquires Dropcam, which was a very cool company. They made Wi-Fi connected cameras that you could drop around your home, hence Dropcam. And apparently Google Corp Dev, Google, the parent company, had been pursuing this deal for a while, and then kind of sent it over to Nest and said, hey, we want to acquire this. Like, why don't we make this part of Nest? And Nest says, okay, they acquire it. And it's basically a complete disaster from a cultural standpoint. So
didn't the founder leave like immediately?
Well, not immediately, but there's even more drama than that. So Dropcam, the founder, Greg Duffy, he had worked for Zobni, which is inbox backwards. That was one of Y Combinator's first companies in one of the first batches of YC.
And that was like Rapportive, right? Like it was like a Gmail plugin CRM type thing.
Yep. Yeah, it was like I think it was like an Outlook plugin CRM. And I actually got it confused with Plaxo, which was trying to do the same thing, which was Sean Parker's startup after Facebook, or no, before Facebook. Anyway, so that's kind of the DNA that Greg Duffy, the founder of Dropcam, came from. Was like right out of school, joins this YC company in the first batch. He's there for 2 years. He starts Dropcam. A lot of the folks at Dropcam would then go on to like plenty of other new startups in the Valley afterwards. So it's kind of a young scrappy team. Super different from like the Apple DNA that Tony and Matt are bringing to Nest. So basically nothing happens. They had this roadmap, and the next major product that Nest was working on was a security product, like a home alarm system. And Dropcam had also been working on a security product, I think called Tabs. But Nest put and that was like pretty close to launching. Nest puts Dropcam's security product on indefinite hold, moves everybody over to working on the Nest product, and it just keeps getting delayed and doesn't ship. And so like a year goes by, and Greg Duffy, the Dropcam CEO, he's really frustrated. he sends a memo to Larry Page saying that Tony
That's
is
always good when someone feels the need to
always good.
email the CEO directly.
Email the CEO. He emails. This is all reported on and then later published. He emails Larry Page and basically says Tony is completely mismanaging Nest. He should be fired, and I should be the CEO of Nest.
Oh God, we've seen this story before.
Yeah, and it predictably does not play well for anybody, really. First of all, Greg. So Greg, pretty immediately after that, leaves the company. Larry sides with Tony. And as this story gets even worse, so Greg's leaving, and Tony then is interviewed in an article by The Information, and he badmouths not just Greg, but the whole Dropcam team, and says that they were, quote, not as good as we hoped. It was a small and not very experienced team. So just completely throws them under the bus. Wow. Not good, not pretty. In response, Greg writes a Medium article, which is still out there, basically taking all of his complaints that he emailed Larry about with Tony and Nest and publishing them for the public, and implying that Tony took essentially all of Steve Jobs's personality traits, the yelling and the screaming, without his product sense.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, fun stuff. So. Once again, we're not here to opine one way or another on Acquired, but certainly made for a lot of drama.
That's what I'm here for. I mean,
yeah.
Speak for yourself, David.
So now what you were referring to earlier, Ben, all while this is going on, another big thing happens at Google. Two big things, actually. First, they hire Ruth Porat to join as CFO. And Ruth had been CFO of Morgan Stanley before coming to Google. And a big part of Ruth's coming, as was talked about, and I think it's played out in practice, is bringing a lot more structure to Google and particular financial discipline. So she's part of the whole sort of restructuring of Google into Alphabet, and that happens towards the end of 2015. Now, apparently, when that happens, all of those agreements between Nest and Google got redone. So the 5-year runway, the lack of financial accountability, if it existed in the first place, it certainly doesn't anymore once Nest gets pushed out as its own independent company under Alphabet.
And part of this, too, if I recall, was that during the acquisition, there was super, super heavy incentives for the management team and key engineers to stay at Nest, right? Like I think they couldn't sell their, no, wait, it was a cash deal. So maybe they just didn't get Google stock awards or something for an extended period of time.
Or it could have been escrowed.
But yeah, I do remember, it was an abnormal, sort of abnormally long retention period.
And I suspect that is definitely the case because now some just weird behavior starts occurring. So at the very end of the year, there start to be rumors that Alphabet's looking to sell Nest. That Nest hasn't been able to ship products. They're not realizing their vision of what Google and Alphabet really care about, which is like the operating system for the connected home. And Tony, of course, is really unhappy about this. But for whatever reason, maybe retention reasons, he stays at Google. He starts also working on the Google Glass team, on redoing Google Glass to be less dorky.
Literally looking to maintain the same W-2 so he gets whatever bonus needs to happen.
You said it, not me.
And they got so serious into trying to sell Nest, it had like a project code name called Amalfi, Project Amalfi.
Oh, interesting. I didn't see that.
Yeah, failed to find a buyer though.
Yeah. Wow. And then the icing on the cake, the kind of last straw on the camel's back here is in May of 2016, a Nest employee files a complaint against Google with the National Labor Relations Board, saying that Alphabet and Nest fired him because he was posting on Facebook about all the leadership issues at Nest. So it's just a firestorm. And then the next month, in June 2016, Tony finally leaves Nest. And since then, whether all of these problems were on Tony, on Google, on Greg and Dropcam, who knows? Probably some responsibility is shared amongst all of them. But things do start to turn around at Nest. So they bring on a new CEO, Marwan Farwaz, to replace Tony. And Marwan came actually first from the cable industry, but then he was part of Motorola, and part of Motorola when Google owned Motorola, flashing back to our HTC episode and Android and everything here. And he was part of the division that made set-top boxes and cable modems within Motorola. And so he worked with Rick Osterloh, who was head of Motorola under Google, now has come back and is Google's SVP of hardware. So they have a working relationship. And once he joins, things start to move a little farther. So first big thing that happens, which we're definitely going to talk about in Tech Themes, Google itself launches Google Home in late 2016, which is their Amazon Echo and Alexa competitor. Now, interestingly, totally separate from Nest. So it was Google's hardware division that worked on that, not Nest.
Which when you start reading blog posts that are trying to like rewrite history a little bit, they talk a lot about sort of the shared DNA and collaboration and how we couldn't have done it without working together. And I think over time they became much more integrated. But yeah, certainly was a little odd when Google Home got announced and it had nothing to do with Nest.
Yeah. But in the meantime, Nest finally ships a new camera, a new Dropcam product, Nest Cam Outdoor. And then they followed that up with Nest Cam IQ, which is actually starting to use some of Google's expertise here. They use machine learning to recognize faces in the Dropcam. So for security features, you can tell if it's someone who's supposed to be in your house or not supposed to be in your house. Late last year, they launched a lower priced version of the thermostat, I think called the Nest E, thermostat E or something like that. And then they also finally launched the security product, Nest Secure, after a bunch of delays, along with Nest Hello, which is a smart doorbell camera, sort of like the Ring doorbell. And then all of that happens,
sort of like
inspired by.
Yeah.
All of that happens. We mentioned at the beginning of this whole history, Matt's thesis advisor at CMU, Yoki Matsuoka, who was the VP of technology, when all of this drama really started going down, she actually left Nest in 2015, and she went to Apple, of all places. And then in 2017, she left Apple, came back to Nest, rejoined Nest as CTO in 2017, right before they launched the ML version of the camera. And now she's Nest CTO again.
Wow, man, the horse trading here is pretty amazing. Everybody cycles through Apple and Google in some way.
And General Magic.
Yeah. Well, let me take a minute here to talk about some of the financial numbers that evolved throughout this time, and sort of how is Nest doing today, and how did it, how was it doing sort of from 2014 on. It's difficult to know exactly. There's some leaks that have happened, so we know those things. There's things we can infer by looking at the large percentage of Google's other bets category, which come from Nest revenue. And so let's dive into those a little bit. So I mentioned there was a mark that Nest was supposed to hit that was $300 million a year in revenue. In 2015, they did hit that. They had $340 million in revenue, as reported by a leak out of the division, and that includes the Dropcam revenue. So a lot of people were speculating they probably weren't going to hit that alone, but having Dropcam helped them sort of bolster and hit that goal. It was an expensive division to run. It stayed very separately. They've got all this turmoil. So, in 2016, they were looking to explore a sale. It didn't happen. Let's look at what in 2016, 2017, what actually happened in the other bets category. So for the first 9 months of 2017, it did quite well. The revenues grew by 45%, and other bets up to $794 million, and we're on pace to exceed $1 billion in 2017. It's pretty fair to assume that happened. And it was reported in 2016 that Nest had contributed about 3/4 of the Other Bets revenue. And while the other segments of Other Bets are growing, there's certainly nothing revenue generating on the scale that Nest is revenue generating. So, we
and YouTube is not included in Other Bets, right?
Correct. I believe that rolls up under Google.
I think that's right now, but I haven't actually read Google's 10K in a while.
I'm not
or
sure.
Alphabet's 10K.
It's definitely not Other Bets because it generates a ton of revenue. It was, at least as far as we could tell, a year or so ago, it was about a break-even business over at YouTube.
Yep.
But despite the growth in revenues, these businesses and Other Bets continue to lose money. So, again, in the first 3 quarters of 2017, they reported $2.44 billion in operating losses, and Google's operating profit rose by 20% to over $24 billion. So if you look at, the Other Bets is losing $2.44 billion, Google's operating profit as an entire, or actually just the Google division is $24.1 billion. So,
wow.
Losing a colossal amount of money over Other Bets, that's largely attributable to Waymo and a lot of the other sort of major R&D things they're doing. But you
got to imagine Nest too.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's 3-4 new products coming out at a pretty rapid clip here from Nest, and a lot of hardware R&D to get there.
Yep.
But it is we should look and say conservatively that Nest is doing over $500 million in revenue now, annually, and that's gotten better. And the last year I think looked really promising for them. They're starting to do more integration with Google Home, but they still feel largely like two separate ecosystems. And in fact, Nest integrates quite nicely with Alexa and is kind of an accessory to the. Oh, that's hilarious.
Lady A, Ben.
Yeah.
Lady A.
That's right. That's right. I woke her. But yeah, I think we'll get a lot into talking about the sort of vertical horizontal strategy there, but Nest products doing well. Is it contributing to the operating system of the home effort on Google's part? TBD.
Well, I mean, this is the perfect seg into the end to the history and facts here, which is that in the first week of February in 2018, there is an announcement that Nest is getting acquired again. It's just getting acquired by Google, moving from a wholly separate division under Alphabet in the Other Bets category, being integrated back into Google as part of the hardware team led by Rick Osterloh. And there's going to be much tighter integration now between Nest, all of its suite of products, and Google Home and everything that's an Android and everything that's going on from a hardware standpoint within Google. Interestingly, so Matt Rogers, the famous co-founder, who actually seems like a really awesome dude, he stayed at Nest throughout all of this. The day after that announcement, he announced that he was leaving. So he'll now be leaving Nest, and both founders are gone, and it'll be fully within Google.
He's transitioned to a full-time investor, right? He's going to be in venture.
I think that's the plan for now. Now, interestingly, Tony. So when Tony left Nest back in the summer of 2016, he resumed where he was before starting Nest. He moved back to Paris. So he and his family moved to Paris, and he's been very vocal that he's going to live in Paris, indefinitely. Now he has started his own venture investing practice with his own money. He hasn't raised any outside money, called Future Shape. And he's all in on Paris, and he's given a bunch of interviews, very, very anti Silicon Valley. And you can sort of imagine that. I mean, he's had such negative experiences with the biggest companies in the Valley. So it'll be super interesting to see how this all plays out. He's funding companies in Europe and in the US and in the Valley. Some of his portfolio companies have had run-ins and fights with Apple, with Google. So he's still very much part of the scene, but hanging out in Paris.
Wow. Leave the gloves on, but just hang out far away from the fight.
Yeah.
All right, listeners. Now is a great time to thank our longtime friend of the show, ServiceNow. If you are running a large enterprise, AI agents are likely spread across every team, and deploying them is no longer the hard part.
Yeah. The hard part is knowing what permissions they have, what employees are using them for, or what decisions AI is making. AI security for an enterprise at scale is not a small concern. Like, the risks are real.
Exactly. And the challenge with AI is governing it, securing it, measuring it, and making sure that it actually delivers value. That is why ServiceNow built the AI Control Tower.
Yep. AI Control Tower gives enterprises a single place to see, manage, govern, and optimize AI across the entire business. And it works with any AI, not just theirs. Every device on your network, every permission across every system, every AI agent visible and secure in one place.
And ServiceNow can do this because they've spent more than 20 years building the operational backbone of the enterprise, the workflows, governance, approvals, security controls, and institutional knowledge that power how work actually gets done across IT, HR, customer service, finance, and security.
ServiceNow already runs more than 100 billion workflows annually and trillions of transactions for more than 85% of the Fortune 500. So when companies need a place to govern AI at enterprise scale, they're building on a platform at the center of how their business already operates.
And in a future that isn't going to be one AI, it's going to be thousands of AI agents working across every function of the company. But the question is, who's managing them all?
So if you're trying to turn AI ambition into real business outcomes and make it work safely, securely, at scale, go check out servicenow.com/acquired and tell them that Ben and David sent you.
All right, acquisition category.
All right, let's. This one might be even harder to tell than the history and facts here.
Yeah, I mean, so what it comes down to for me is what Google said they were going to do and what they did. And so, I mentioned earlier, kind of foreshadowing my feelings about this, massive amount, 2.35 billion of the 3.2 billion of the purchase price was attributable to synergies. We believe that we'll combine these businesses in some way and it'll bolster our existing business. So when you start walking through Google's existing business, it is, we make a ton of money on search ads because when people have intent to do anything on the internet, then they go through Google, and businesses pay the Google tax to acquire those people as customers. And so that's their business. It's to be horizontal and broad and touch as many people as possible and get as much data about all people as possible so that they can more effectively advertise to them. It's Google's core business. It's super different than Apple's business of making hardware differentiated by software that they charge a premium for. It's not that business. Nest was making sort of the high-end hardware bets that Apple had made. I mean, Tony came from that business, understood that really well. And so when I look at this synergies, you would think that what they do with Nest is integrated into Google and help build that corpus of data and that ecosystem of being a Google user so that they can better have their core business and advertise. What they actually did was, as a separate business unit for this long, try and hedge their bet and say, where does our next, multi-billion or multi-hundred billion dollar innovation come from? Maybe it's an Apple-like business that exists next to a Google-like business in this subsidiary portfolio called Alphabet. And it actually is not a synergy with the Google business that feeds data in there. And it's the separate thing. And it is realizing Tony Fadell's vision, but they flip-flop back and forth on it so many times that I think that $2.3 billion was just super value destructive. They if they were going to have Nest and do with Nest what they did, they should have acquired it for, a couple billion less. Or they should have gone harder at this strategy of synergy. So I'll say what they ended up buying was a business line and massively overpaying for it.
Are you saying there's a vertical and horizontal issue here? Yeah. I mean, I think to me, as I was thinking about this, and believe me, we had a long time to think about it during that history and facts. I think the problem is that Google didn't really know what category they were buying when they bought it, right?
And there's a compelling argument for each one, but make one and carry it out.
Yeah. Yep. And if you think about how it started, this whole relationship started. Well, it really started when Yoki joined the company, and Sebastian Thrun was turned on to what was going on here. And then when Sergey saw the prototype, and I think what it seems like that Google got excited about, rightly so, is this idea of like, this could be the next computing platform, after smartphones.
Right.
And that probably was the right thing to get excited about. But I don't think they thought through like what the right way to attack that is. And I was thinking about this, like the parallels between the Google Nest acquisition and the Facebook Oculus acquisition are like really apt, I think, because in both cases, like what was hot at the time were these, quote unquote, Facebook style acquisitions of, we're going to buy these promising companies. We're going to let them be independent. We're going to give them a ton of runway, the Instagram style, the WhatsApp style. But I think the difference is like those worked because fundamentally those are not platform companies. Like those are networks and services built on top of computing platforms. But what Oculus and what Nest were trying to do, they were trying to build new computing platforms. And when you're trying to do that, when you're trying to be a full stack hardware, software, OS company along the lines of Google or Apple, you need as much resources as possible. And you need like the best engineers in the world and the best product people. And if you're, there's a hardware element, the best folks there too. And so I think leaving them separate was kind of like not realizing the best vision. And now you see like Oculus is now integrated into Facebook. And Nest is, of course, now integrated back into Google. I think if you're going to make a platform play, you got to have the resources of a platform company.
Yep. And there's one thing, when I was doing research for this, there's a Stratechery quote that's like it's too freaking spot on not to use, because it's a brilliant framework. So if you think about what Amazon did with Alexa, like they just hang on, let me turn her off. If you think about what Amazon did with Alexa, they said there's going to be a home operating system and there's going to be a center control point for that. And we believe it's going to be voice. And so we're just going to build the central controller. And then there's a whole ecosystem around it. And they just went right through the middle, right? They said, this is it. This is the heart and soul of this thing. This is the digital hub. And when you look at what Google's strategy was, we don't know exactly how that ecosystem will play out. We know there's going to be an operating system of the home. This feels like a good vector into it. But what they ended up doing was kind of creating the side entry, the same way that Microsoft wanted to own the living room. And so they created a gaming console that fit into an existing market and tried to branch out from there. And so Ben Thompson's quote in Stratechery, which I think is just a brilliant point, is in any new market, it pays off to simply aim for the sweet spot. Amazon Echo is unabashedly trying to be the key interaction point for an automated home. Nest is more of an attempt to slide through the side door. And it's such a simple way to think about it. Like if there's an existing market, you have to figure out how you're going to flank and attack from sort of where you think the market is moving rather than where it is today, and then Trojan horse your way into it. If it's a brand new market, like smart homes, people have been trying to make a smart home for 30 years and like it just hasn't happened. And we're in this era now with IoT in the home that it's finally here. It's a reality. And this is the timing is exactly right to do it. And so if you're going to do it, then just aim right up the middle, create the center control point, you be the bundler, and then you own the ecosystem. And I think it's easy to say now by a couple of, pundits who do a podcast, but like the really hard to see at the time. And Google did sort of this side entry strategy, and now is doing the Google Home thing so they're going for the central control point. But years later, lost a lot of market share, lost a lot of ecosystem development, and in fact, Nest, their own thing, is integrating with their biggest competitor, who's out ahead in the lead.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also like all of the history and facts, is instructive here. That like the way if you're going for that straight down the middle, the new operating system in a new market, you need like startups are not best equipped to do that. You need the resources of a big company. And I'm thinking like back to Tony when he was launching the iPod at Apple. Like the iPod worked because of iTunes and the iMac, and it was part of the digital hub, right? The iPod in and of itself, there were plenty of startup MP3 player companies of all types, but like Apple worked because it had the whole ecosystem and the operating system. And similarly, you know, with Amazon and Lady A, I won't set off your speech.
She's off now.
Nice. With Amazon and Alexa, you know, it was all of the divisions within Amazon that came together to build Alexa. I mean, one of my best friends from undergrad was an early PM on Alexa, and they were working on it for years before the first Echo shipped. And he came from AWS, and a lot of the early Alexa team and Echo team came from that part of the company, not to mention the Kindle and the devices, and then all of Amazon's whole ecosystem. It wasn't like we're going to make a point product. It was from the beginning, like, you know, this is a computing ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so like for Google and Facebook with Oculus to then buy these companies and leave them, you know, independent, to me is like when this is the goal is not the right way to do it.
Yeah, David, I think that's a great point. I was trying to think of counterexamples, and listeners, maybe you can come up with some and email us, acquiredfm@gmail.com. I don't actually I was going to make the point of like, what? Come on, startups can totally jumpstart an ecosystem. But a lot of times when you think about this, it is like the second or third innovation after a company already gets their foothold. It was when they start that ecosystem. You had a great point with the iPod. Even looking back with Microsoft, I mean, Windows was after they already had a strong foothold shipping DOS on IBM PC and a variety of other PCs. Like, it's often the second or third swing is when you take a new ecosystem, when
you build the platform. Yeah, and look at Facebook and Google, which have certainly become platform companies in their own right, but their first products were you know, network opportunities and network products really built on top of existing platforms, you know, on top of the web in both of their cases.
Yeah.
And it was only then after they had that they then turned it into a platform.
And to put it into perspective too, how much getting this head start that Alexa got really gives them an advantage from Google Home. There was a 2017 report in September that there was about 20 million Echoes that had been sold versus about 7 million Google Homes. Then over the holidays, Amazon announced there were tens of millions. So we should assume, you know, minimum 20 million sold over the holiday season. And so, you know, you're looking at, 40 plus million compared to maybe 10 or 15. It's a pretty, you know, assuming they both keep growing on the same curve for a while, and you know, Google doesn't do something that is like totally 100% better and causes people to switch or to, you know, forget about Alexa. It feels like a winner's been defined here. And particularly friends who went to CES this year said freaking everything had a Works with Alexa badge on it. And
well, even like, you know, your Lady A that keeps activating in the background, right? Like you've got it all in Sonos in your house, you know?
Well, the cool thing, so personally, I'm not willing to make the bet yet on like, it's funny how like Sonos lets you hedge because they are going to be rolling out Google Home. You can flip it back and forth between the two ecosystems. So I haven't committed yet.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize.
Oh yeah. So Sonos has changed in their strategy. They decided to be Switzerland.
Huh. Ah, interesting. But the Google Home on other devices isn't ready yet, right?
I don't think so. And AirPlay 2 isn't out yet either, so Sonos doesn't. It will start bundling in AirPlay 2. I'm assuming not Siri, but we'll be able to work in the Apple ecosystem a little bit.
But it's interesting. Like it's such an important head start for Amazon and Alexa, right? Like right now, they're the only game in town for third-party computing devices to use the assistant.
Totally.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, I feel like related, you know, what would have happened otherwise is kind of in this camp. I think the interesting thing for me to think about is like, would any of what we just talked about have been different in terms of category and strategy if, let's say that Sergey had gotten his way and acquired Nest in 2011 when it was still so young?
Yeah, and it didn't have a strong... Well, I mean, it already had Fidel. It's not like it didn't have a strong culture of its own.
But maybe then
they wouldn't
maybe Tony and Matt would have become leaders within Google.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing: is like what we glanced over is like the innovation for the home was voice, like hands down. That's the bundle point for the home.
Yeah,
and Nest wasn't there. Like Nest was doing this very cool, smart, internet connected appliances thing, and let's say they developed 20 or 30 of those. Like how long would it have taken for Nest to realize, oh, the center locus of control is putting a voice thing in the middle of the home? And Amazon figured that out. And of course, Google had Google Assistant on the phones, and Siri existed on iPhones. But or actually, it wasn't Google Assistant. It was whatever, the OK Google thing. The Amazon was really the one to realize that's how we win the home. And so I'm not sure that either acquiring Nest earlier or bundling Nest into Google instead of keeping it as its own thing earlier would have necessarily yielded Google producing the Google Home 1 or 2 years earlier.
Yeah, although I was just thinking about this and looking back on my notes to make sure I got the history right. If Google had acquired Nest in 2011, it would have been a very similar playbook to when they acquired Android in 2005. And Android, if we remember our history and facts correctly, when Andy Rubin was running it as a startup, the vision was not phones, but to be a Linux-based operating system for digital cameras, which sounds really similar here too, right? They had the right technology and the right market, but the wrong approach to it. And then it was within Google that it has got reshaped to become Android we know today.
These general magic guys are like 90% of the way there, but just need a form factor pivot.
This clearly none of them can exist as independent companies. I don't mean that as a dig. Like they've done amazing things, but I think it's all part of the same theme, though, right? Like when you're talking about building a platform, it's just so hard to do it as an independent company.
Well, at the very least, I would say buying it earlier. There's two ways that this could have gone better for Google. Buy it earlier so you pay less money for it, and then you can execute a similar strategy. Or bundle it in with Google and just have one strategy and understand exactly what you're building and why, rather than sort of making a separate new business line bet on it. The question I have no data on is like what happens to Nest if Google doesn't buy them, and I mean it would.
Well, they were raising that big funding round, so they probably would have been able to continue.
Sure, but do they come out with an Alexa Google Home type thing? Like, do they figure out how to be the ecosystem in your home, or do they just become the best peripherals to integrate with someone else's ecosystem?
It's hard to do without AWS or Google Cloud Engine on the back end because so much of the voice interaction is driven by the server side. I don't know. I don't know.
Tech themes?
All right. Tech themes. Let's do it. Okay. So my first tech theme, which is just reminded me, this whole thing, as I was thinking about it, reminded me so much of is the famous quote, the Steve Jobs quote, which he stole from, I'm blanking. Ben, you're going to remember the guy he stole it from. But, if you really care about software, you care about hardware
Alan
too.
Kay?
Yeah, the Alan Kay quote.
Yeah.
When you're talking about computing platforms, like it's not just software, it's not just hardware, it's not just services, it's all three all together. And I think that's like, to my mind, a big thing that like, who knows if Nest had remained independent if it could have gone after all that, but it was too focused on just the hardware, and not enough on the software, not enough on the services, and not enough on the ecosystem altogether.
That's a great theme. And it's interesting too in the last couple of years how it's become not just hardware and software, but hardware and services, or hardware, software, and services. And I noticed services are effectively software just running on a different piece of hardware and then coming down to yours. But earlier when I was saying, Apple's business model is hardware that's differentiated by software. It's differentiated now by software and services. And it's so, the game has changed and the table stakes are now all three of those when it was just the two when Alan Kay came up with a quote. Yep.
That's my first one I got. And then the other one we've also talked about, but which is, in some ways, I think you could listen to what we're saying here, and if you buy it, it could be discouraging for startups. But I think it's actually just more like a lesson about how to stair step as a startup, to borrow another Ben Thompson term, which is that you can't start with the platform in mind, but you can start with a product, and a product that has a network effect. And then you can use that to then in the next generation bridge into the platform. And you've seen this. I mean, again, this is how Google, this is how Facebook started. As you pointed out, this is really how Microsoft started too. Apple as well, all of them.
Netflix couldn't start producing shows without having previously cheaply gotten all the rights to the other shows. And before that, have done the DVD distribution business to bootstrap the customer base. Like you need to do a network effect product first, and then you can have a platform that you can build on top or adjacent to it.
Yep. And I'm thinking again about Snap, right? Like we haven't talked about Snap in a while, but we can certainly argue the degree of success here. But like, I think the strategy was right. Like Snapchat is a app with a very strong network effect, and then can they've built off that, and then can they leverage that into becoming a broader platform, like they tried with Spectacles unsuccessfully. But I still think there's something to what they're doing with AR versus what any of the other big platform companies are doing. You could argue that they are the most successful, AR company out there right now. And will they be able to stair step up? So anyway.
Well, one for me was timing. I remember the first time I went and visited Microsoft before working there in, when did I go? 2010, 2011, seeing the smart home. And that was a thing that had existed for like years and years and years. And there was like always this promise of getting to the smart home, but many companies had failed at delivering on that over the years. And one thing I've been sort of thinking to myself is like, why now? Like, why is it actually coming to fruition now? Why are there Sonos with Alexa littered around my house, and I can unlock my front door with my phone? And what is it that finally made it hit a tipping point where it's a real market now? And Nest nailed the timing. I mean, strategy be damned. Like, and maybe their strategy was just be the best peripherals and not own the ecosystem, but they really nailed it they were about 6 to 12 months ahead of when people really wanted this stuff, but they weren't 5 years ahead. And they're really starting to hit their stride, I think, with all the products that people want. I don't think people no longer move into a house and think, okay, I'm going to go get an ADT security system. Like people now for the first time, and I think we're still in the early adopter phase, but it's like, well, of course I'm going to get something that integrates with my, whatever my ecosystem is. I'm not just going to go with the status quo thing. So I don't know, Dave, what do you think? Is it cloud computing? Is it, why now? Why today?
Long silence. I don't know. I mean, this is why I'm trying to think. In retrospect, I think we can look back on it and we can say sensors. We can say certainly the smartphone was a big part about that. You can like control your Nest from your smartphone, and that existing
because you wouldn't have cared before that you could control it from anywhere else, because that anywhere else would have been like a website.
Yep. And I think one of the piece of the positioning and functionality that Nest got really right was this idea of being a learning smart home device, not a smart home device. Like it learned from like when you were home and when you were not home and all that stuff. So I think those are enabling factors. But I also think like when Matt and Tony started working on this in 2010, nobody could have seen that. I mean, maybe you could have seen like the smartphone piece, but like, this is really like to me, what makes really great product-oriented founders is that ability to take some seemingly disconnected pieces, assemble it together, just like Tony did in the 6-week consulting stint, with Apple for the iPod, and say, we can take these pieces, put it together. This is why the timing is right for now and why consumers will buy this. And it definitely worked. Like, I mean, they sold a lot of thermostats, you know? And I think it's like because of that vision.
That's a good point. Any other tech themes?
That's what I got for now, but I think that's a good seg into grading.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so negative on this. Like, I don't know if anybody could tell. I think it's a fine business. It wasn't the big play. They started doing the big play pretty late and internally and centrally, and they overpaid by a couple $1 billion for the small play, and it created a lot of turmoil and PR stuff and, you know, internal politicking. Like, I think this is a D.
Yeah. Well, to me, thinking about grading, the biggest opportunity cost here associated with this whole saga was being really slow to respond to Alexa. And like, I'm sure, you know, when Google Home finally did come out and was done primarily through Google and whatnot, you know, I mean, end of 2016, like, wow, that's crazy late. Crazy late. I mean, not as late as the HomePod, you know, which is both late and terrible. It sounds like, I mean, good sound, but like terrible as a voice assistant.
Hey, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see.
I mean,
We'll see.
Apple has a different strategy than Google and Alexa have here. So I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I think it's distinct enough where I don't think it should be what people are trying to make it out to be, which is like Apple releases their exact competitor with these guys.
Right. Fair enough, but still, I mean, HomePod aside, Apple doesn't have a credible competitor to Amazon in the home either. Yeah. You know, nor does Microsoft. Nobody does. So, but arguably, Google should have been. Isn't
there actually a Cortana piece of hardware? Like, there is actually some kind of thing. I just haven't.
I said credible competitor.
Right.
I'm sure Microsoft does have some sort of competitor. It's a competing product, but yeah, I think, you know, again, it's impossible to know, right? But like, to me, the biggest miss here is not the money they spent on Nest, is not the corporate drama, is not all this stuff. It's like, why did it take until November 2016 for Google Home to come out, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So I think I'm sort of with you too on this one. Not because I'm going to go agree with you on a D. Not because Nest is a terrible business. Not because Tony and Matt weren't super.
In fact, it's probably a good business. I mean,
it's probably good business, and yeah, and like the product innovation is great, and you know, and I think they do have a really solid team there, as we've talked about. But like, it's not where Google needed to be competing.
Yeah, I mean, from a financial analysis perspective, like I do wonder. It's probably higher than a D if you just think about like, okay, in 2014 dollars, if you pay 3.2 billion for something, and presuming that their growth continues, like when will that investment sort of pay back, and what will if you look at it like on a 15-20 year horizon, like maybe it actually was a great investment, but I just think strategically for Google, wrong bet.
Yeah, a lot of wasted time. All right, well, there we are. Nest. In 90 minutes or less. Carve Outs.
So I started listening to my new favorite podcast this week. It is called Do By Friday. And it is a weekly challenge show hosted by Merlin Mann, Alex Cox, and Max Temkin. And Alex Cox and Max Temkin are from Cards Against Humanity. And Merlin Mann is the famed author of the productivity blog back in the day, 43 Folders. He's on a bunch of the sort of Gruber talk show type podcasts. He's Hot Dogs Ladies on Twitter. He's got another couple of shows. He's on a bunch of podcasts, but he's pedantic, quick, brilliant, and like is very, very into like productivity hacking and tools and stuff like that. And it's like the podcast is hilarious. You'll get almost no utility value out of it, but it is like three very smart people who are very quick, who are just talking about like a lot of the things that apparently make me light up. So I highly recommend it if you like less serious versions of Acquired with less content, less utility, but like a lot. It's just three people who really enjoy each other's company, and it's really fun to listen to.
We're not that serious here on Acquired.
No, we've gotten more serious though. You listen to the early episodes, and you're like, did they even like Google it? And
yeah, now we're at the opposite end of that spectrum. Yeah. Well, give us some feedback in the Slack. Tell us what you think. That sounds awesome, though. Also, Merlin Mann, what a great
so
name.
Good. Oh yeah, it's an amazing name. He's got, and his vocabulary is as good as his names. Like you listen to it and you come up with like amazing, just awesome ways to express feelings that you didn't realize you had.
Well, my Carve Outs is a article by Mark Arix in the California Sunday Magazine, which I didn't even know was a thing till I found this link. But this is an incredible piece of reporting. It's very, very long, but it's called "A Kingdom from Dust," and it's about the farming industry in Central California, and in particular, one farming company, the Wonderful Company, which makes I think about 65% of the world's almonds and pistachios, and pomegranates, the like palm juice. Remember that stuff? Like they make that. They have a bunch of other brands, and Halo, those little mini clementine oranges things.
Oh yeah, you buy them by the little cardboard box.
Yep. They make those, and it's just this super in-depth piece about like the history. This couple, it's a husband and wife who owns it. They live in Beverly Hills. They had nothing to do with farming before they started buying up all this stuff. The environmental impact of everything, particularly through the drought in California, and like it's insane the amount of water that goes into. Well, first off, Central California is a desert, so all the water is either piped in from snow melt or other parts of the state, or essentially mined from the aquifer below the earth. And the amount of water that goes into like 1 year's worth of, almonds in the Central Valley could like be enough water for San Francisco for a decade. And yet like it's just this really good piece of like this husband and wife and company have done a lot of good things for the community there, and a lot of philanthropy. So it's very ambiguous. I feel like the author set out to write a very negative piece, and there are very negative aspects of it, but like it's a very nuanced, balanced take. So really, really good long read if you're looking for something about California and history and water.
Wow, cool. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we got.
Yeah, I think this might be our longest episode, but a storied history at Apple, Google, Nest, and basically talking about sort of what is the next frontier, like what is the next multi-$100 billion business. It deserves the time.
Indeed.
All right, listeners, now is a great time to talk about one of our favorite companies, Statsig.
Yes, longtime acquired partner. There is a reason why the best product teams at companies like OpenAI and Notion, Atlassian, Figma, Rippling, Brex, and more rely on Statsig, whether they are iterating on their core product features or shipping AI-powered experiences at scale.
Yep. In the crazy speed of today's AI world, shipping fast is just table stakes now. It's basically trivial to build and deploy your app constantly. The real advantage is how quickly you learn what changes actually created value for customers and how fast you can use that signal to guide what you ship next. Whether it's a feature tweak, a pricing change, a performance improvement, or an AI update like a model change or prompt adjustment, they're not relying on instinct. They're measuring what actually moved engagement, retention, and ultimately revenue. And as more teams build with AI, that learning loop becomes even more important. Building with LLMs introduces non-determinism into your product experience. The same input doesn't always produce the same output, and behavior can shift in subtle ways in real-world use.
So doing offline evals will give you part of the picture, but you can really only understand the impact once your product is live with real users, and then you can measure how their behavior actually changes. It's very different than the way that you would ship features in a pre-AI world where you knew exactly what the software was going to do in production.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is where StatSig comes in. It brings experimentation, feature flags, and product analytics into one unified system so teams can ship safely, test rigorously, and directly link what they changed to how users actually behaved. The result is a tighter feedback loop and learning that compounds over time, so you don't just ship more, you ship better.
So if you want to make learning your competitive advantage, whether you're building new AI experiences or just evolving your existing core product, go to statsig.com/acquired to get started.
Listeners, if you aren't subscribed and you want to hear more, you can subscribe from your favorite podcast client. And if you feel so inclined, we would love a comment on Breaker. And thanks so much for trying new things with us, and appreciate listening to the show.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.